Hey guys, welcome to Personal Development. I'm your teacher, Miss Christine M. Condes. We're here to discuss the first module, which is knowing oneself. Now, before I start anything else, I would like you to make sure that you have your handouts with you. If you could have it printed, especially for the first chapter, if you could have it printed, that would be perfect. That way, you could write down your notes or even highlight your handouts so that you could have a much better understanding of what we are going to talk about the entire time. Alright, so let's move to the first slide. Socrates, a Greek philosopher, he once said that you need to know thyself, for once we know ourselves, we may learn how to care for ourselves, but otherwise we never shall. What he is trying to tell us here is that we need to know who we are so that we get to understand how we are going to take care of ourselves. For example, you have a headache. We all know that there are different kinds of headache. Like there's a headache that could be cured by just eating something, right? Or there's a headache that could be cured by just lying down and sleeping on it. Or sometimes there's a headache that could be cured by taking a medicine. So we get to identify how we are going to cure that headache if we know what type of headache it is. Okay. Another example will be um, if you have a problem with your friends. There are some people who deals with this situation by just I don't know trying to keep a distance from them, and then hopefully when they do get together everything is back to normal. There are some people who would go into the problem head on, really talk to their friends, and then eventually um, attack the problem. Okay, so they're going to talk about the problem and then find a solution or find some sort of resolution. So what Socrates is really trying to tell us is that we need to know and understand ourselves so that we get to understand also how to take care of ourselves. Now, it's important for us to define what a self is. So basically, the self consists of all the characteristics of a person. And when we talk about characteristics, this could involve you being an introvert or an extrovert, your likes or dislikes, the attitude that you have um, on certain issues, your belief systems, your values, how you were brought up. All of these things are characteristics of a person, and it is what makes the self. The thing is, adolescents, or what I would often call you guys as young adults, you guys carry with you a sense of who you are and what makes you different from everyone else. Kilala na ninyo yung sarili ninyo. Somehow, you already have that idea. You know your likes and your dislikes. You know how to handle your own problems. There are people who would approach their problem head on, while there are some who would become emotional first before they work on their problems. So somehow you already know, or you already have a sense of who you are. Now, real or imagined, an adolescent's developing sense of self and uniqueness is a motivating force in life. Our exploration of the self begins with information about adolescents' self-understanding and understanding others, then turns to their self-esteem and self-concept. Let's look at these two examples. A 12-year-old boy understands that he is a student, a basketball player, a family member, and a video game lover. A 14-year-old girl understands that she is a soccer player, a student council member, a movie lover, and a rock music fan. So these are all based on roles and membership categories, but not the whole personal identity. So pag pinag-usapan natin yung personality, ng isang tao, hindi natin siya pwedeng ikahon or i-attribute as someone na mabait lang. Okay? Um, because you could be a lot of things. One person could be a lot of things. I, for example, could be a lot of things. If I am talking to you right now, my role here is to be a teacher. So it's really one directional, diba? Me giving you information. But when I put on my hat as a psychologist, okay, I do not preach. I do not tell them what to do, but it's more of me giving them a listening ear. So that's what we mean by self-understanding. You are able to describe attributes of yourself. And then later on, you get to evaluate these attributes. So you're gonna ask yourself, naging mabuti ba akong anak? Magaling ba ako sa basketball? Mahina ba ako sa mathematics? All of these things, these are your way of evaluating your sense of self. Now, self-understanding is defined as the individual's cognitive representation of the self, the substance and content of self-conceptions. Now, we have different aspects of the self. The first one is what we call abstraction and idealism. Adolescents begin to think in more abstract and idealistic ways. So what do we mean by this? Let's look into this example. 14-year-old Laurie's description of herself. I am a human being. I am indecisive. I don't know who I am. So this is an example of abstract thinking. And when we talk about abstract thinking, it's really about thinking about all the possibilities that is available for you. Now let's look at this one. I am a naturally sensitive person who really cares about other people's feelings. I think I'm pretty good looking. So when we talk about idealism, it's more of having an egocentric outlook on themselves. They think that you guys are completely mature individuals and that you no longer need advice from adults. However, adolescents and young adults have this tendency to expect the best possible results in all situations. So that's what we mean by idealism. The second aspect of the self is differentiation. Adolescents are more likely than children to note contextual or situational variations when describing themselves. Adolescents are more likely than children to understand that they possess several different selves, each one to some degree reflecting a specific role or context. Let's look at this example. A 15-year-old girl might describe herself by using one set of characteristics in connection with her family and another set of characteristics in connection with her peers and friends. Yet another set of characteristics might appear in her self-description of her romantic relationship. In other words, there are some parts of ourselves that is different when we are with our families, different when we are with our friends, and sometimes when we are in a romantic relationship. So baka mas sweet ka kapag kasama mo si boyfriend, or mas outgoing ka kapag kasama mo yung friends mo, or mas honest ka if you are with your family. The third aspect of the self is the fluctuating self. The self fluctuates across situations and across time. The self continues to be characterized by instability until late adolescence or even early adulthood, where a more unified theory of self is constructed. Let's look at this example. The 15-year-old girl remarked that she could not understand how she could switch from being cheerful one moment to being anxious the next and then sarcastic a short time later. Okay. My best example here is try to visualize a young woman. Kayo, yung sarili ninyo, ladies, wherein okay ka 1 minute pero dahil sa magkakaroon ka na, it's that time of the month, and then you realize that you are so irritable, and then you're craving for something, and then once you got once you got that cravings, or nakain mo na yung gusto mo, everything seems okay. Diba? Same as when, I don't know if you have seen this clips or memes wherein the girl is so um, irritable or nagagalit siya. Pero the guy or yung kanyang boyfriend, binigyan siya ng pagkain. And then after eating, everything is back to normal. That's what we mean by the fluctuating self. But guys, please take note, hindi lang babae ang nakaka-experience ng fluctuating self. Kahit yung mga lalaki. Okay? You know how sometimes you guys want to be alone? Nandyan yung magkukulong ka sa kwarto. Tapos kapag okay ka na, lalabas ka ng kwarto, and then that's the time that you get involved in the conversation in your family. The fourth aspect of the self is the contradictions within the self. As adolescents begin to differentiate their concept of the self into multiple roles in different relationship contexts, they see potential contradictions between their differentiated selves. Adolescents develop the cognitive ability to detect these inconsistencies as they strive to construct a general theory of the self. Let's look at this example. Susan Harter in 1986 found that the number of contradictory self-descriptions they mentioned, such as moody and understanding, ugly and attractive, bored and inquisitive, caring and uncaring, introverted and fun-loving, it actually increased dramatically between the 7th to 9th grades. Though the number of contradictory self-descriptions students mentioned declined in the 11th grade, they still outnumbered those noted in the 7th grade. So, what we are trying to say here is that when we try to explain or describe ourselves, sometimes we could be moody and understanding. We could go both ways. The fifth aspect of the self is the real versus ideal, or the true versus the false selves. So this is the capacity to recognize a discrepancy between the real and ideal selves representing a cognitive advance. Now, we have the humanistic theorist Carl Rogers who argued that a strong discrepancy between the real and ideal selves is a sign of maladjustments. Ibig sabihin, kapag masyado daw malawak or masyadong malayo yung ideal self natin sa real self natin, nagkakaroon ng maladjustment, nagkakaroon ng problema sa sarili yung tao, nagkakaroon siya ng problema in terms of his or her mental health. Okay? Now, let's define what is an ideal self. The ideal self is the self that you aspire to be. It is the one that you hope you will possess, or characteristics similar to that of a mentor or some otherworldly figure. So the presence of both hoped for and feared ideal selves is psychologically healthy, lending balance to an adolescent's perspective and motivation. Now, the real self, on the other hand, is the one that you actually see. It is the self that has characteristics that you were nurtured or, in some cases, born to have. So sabi nga natin kanina, if there is a too great discrepancy between one's actual self and one's ideal self, the person wants to be can produce a sense of failure and self-criticism and can even trigger depression. That's why what is important here is the alignment. If the way that I am, which is the actual self, is aligned with the way that I want to be, which is the ideal self, then I will feel a sense of mental well-being or peace of mind. If the way that I am is not aligned with how I want to be, there is incongruence or there's a lack of alignment, which would often result in mental distress or anxiety. For example, you know that you are good in math and science, okay? And you have this vision of yourself of becoming a doctor. Now, every year that you are studying, you are moving towards closer to your ideal self, which is becoming a doctor. Okay? So for example, right now you're a grade 11 student and you are in STEM. Okay? You're good in math, you're good in science. So all of the subjects that you are taking for senior high school is somehow here to prepare you for the bigger challenge of college. Okay? So every year that you are studying, it's bringing you closer to your ideal self, which is to become a doctor. Now, where does the problem lies? It lies with the fact that if your real self is totally different from your ideal self. For example, you're not good in math and science, but you are very good in the arts. But since your parents are both doctors, it's just natural that you become a doctor as well. So, you force yourself, sige, magsa-STEM na lang ako. You force yourself to be in the STEM strand. Okay? First quarter, you're finding yourself in a position where it's very difficult for you to attend to subjects like Gen Math or physics or chemistry. So, there's this discord within yourself na, ano ba to? Kakayanin ko ba? At dahil sa nahihirapan ka araw-araw in attaining that ideal self, doon papasok yung mental anguish. And worst comes to worst, you become depressed. Kasi iba yung ideal self mo as compared doon sa real self mo, which is not that good in math and science, but you are good in the arts. Okay? So, I hope that provides you guys an idea of the difference between real and ideal self and the problem that would arise if there is no alignment. Now, adolescents are most likely to show their false selves with classmates and in romantic or dating situations, while they are least likely to show their false selves with close friends. Adolescents may also display a false self to impress others or to try out new behaviors or roles. They may feel that others do not understand their true selves or that others force them to behave in false ways. Now, some adolescents report that they do not like their false self behavior, but others say that it does not bother them. In one study, they found that experience authenticity of the self is highest among adolescents who say they receive support from their parents. So, the more support you receive from your parents, the more authentic you are as an individual. The sixth aspect of the self is social comparison, as young adolescents are more likely than children to compare themselves with others and to understand that others are making comparisons about them. So it's perfectly normal for that at this point in your life you are making comparison with other people. Like one of your friends might have new phone since they moved up from junior high school to senior high school, but here you are still using the old phone that your parents handed down to you. So the thing is, we have what we call the looking glass self. This is the individual's beliefs about he or she is viewed by others then. So sometimes we have this thinking, paano ba ako tinitingnan ng ibang tao? How do they perceive me? Am I perceived as a kind individual or mataray kaya ako? So sometimes we have a different version of ourselves based on how we see ourselves and based on how other people sees us. Now, we have the seventh aspect of the self, which is self-consciousness. So, adolescents become more introspective. They do not always develop their self-understanding in social isolation. So, adolescents turn to their friends for support and self-clarification and seeks out their friends' opinions in shaping their emerging self-definition. So, what we are trying to explain here with the self-consciousness is that not all the time we just want to be alone to reflect on what has occurred in our life. Sometimes we turn to our friends. Minsan, gusto natin malaman ano kaya yung iniisip nila. Kung if they are going to be put in the same situation as you are they going to do the same thing as you did? So, Sometimes we need other people's support and self-clarification. Tama ba tong ginawa ko? Ganito yung text sa akin ng boyfriend ko. Tama ba tong response ko dito? O masyado ba akong harsh? So, when we become self-conscious once we have other people to tell us. Next aspect of the self is the self-protection. So this is the sense of confusion and conflict that is often stimulated by efforts to understand oneself is accompanied by a need to protect the self. So for example, in an attempt to protect the self, sometimes young adults are prone to deny their negative characteristics. This is consistent with adolescents' tendency to describe the self in idealistic ways. So for example, in Harter's investigation of self-understanding, adolescents were more likely than not to see positive self-descriptions such as attractive, fun-loving, sensitive, affectionate, and inquisitive as essential important aspects of the self, and to see negative descriptions such as ugly, mediocre, depressed, selfish, and nervous as peripheral or less important aspects of the self. So we have this tendency to see the positive descriptions as something that is innate or central to you, and to disregard or sometimes put into the backseat the negative aspects of ourselves. The ninth aspect of the self is the unconscious self. In adolescence, self-understanding involves greater recognition than the self includes unconscious as well as conscious components. So basically, there are certain aspects of our mental experience that is beyond our awareness or control. Now, looking at this image of Freud's view of the human mind, or the mental iceberg, or what we call the iceberg theory of consciousness in psychology. According to Freud, our mind is divided into three parts. Okay? The first part is the conscious. This involves our thoughts and our perceptions. So basically, if you're going to notice, the top part of the iceberg is somehow small. So ibig sabihin, onti lang ang nasa conscious part natin. So if I ask you questions like, what's your name? When is your birthday? Where do you study? Who are your parents? You could easily answer these questions because these are all part of your conscious mind. The next level is what we call the pre-conscious level. This involves memories and stored knowledge. Kasama rin dito yung mga bagay-bagay na hindi natin agad-agad maaalala. Take note of the term, the tip of the tongue, or yung nasa dulo na yung dila mo, for example. You know how sometimes you're trying to remember a particular song and yet you couldn't remember it, and then lagi mong sasabihin, alam ko yung title ng song na yan, nasa dulo na ng dila ko. That is the content of our pre-conscious level. Okay? So, it's a bit larger than the conscious part. So, ibig sabihin na to, there's a large bulk of information that is part of our pre-conscious that needs some time or some effort for us to remember. And of course, the last level or the bigger part of the iceberg is what we call the unconscious. These are the information that is not readily available. Usually, ito yung mga nakalimutan na natin. And it would take some time before we could remember them. So this could involve, or this includes, unacceptable sexual desires, fears, irrational wishes, our shameful experiences, our selfish needs, immoral urges, and violent motives. So, most of the time, we are not aware of these things until such time where it was brought out of our consciousness through our dreams or sometimes through hypnosis. And that's where psychologists would usually do psychoanalysis so that the person gets to understand himself. Bakit kaya masyado akong affected sa mga bagay-bagay. Maybe it has something to do with the unconscious, yung mga information na nakatago sa ating unconscious mind. So this is what the unconscious self is trying to tell us, that what we are is sometimes ruled by our unconscious. And finally, the last aspect of the self is not quite yet a coherent, integrated self. Now, because of the proliferation of selves and unrealistic self portraits during adolescence, the task of integrating these varying self conceptions becomes problematic. Only later, usually in the emerging adulthood, do individuals successfully integrate the many aspects of the self. Okay, so what this is trying to tell us is that we are slowly getting to know ourselves. Okay, you get to identify different versions of ourselves, but it's not yet fully integrated. So it's like a process that you will eventually get to that real and ideal self later on in life, when you're able to have a full grasp of who you really are. And that's when you become an integrated version of yourself. In emerging adulthood, self-understanding becomes more integrative, with the different parts of the self pieced together more systematically. Emerging adults may detect inconsistencies in their earlier self-descriptions as they attempt to construct a general theory of self or the integrated sense of identity. So similar to number 10, basically, growing up, as you go from young adulthood to emerging adulthood to early adulthood, somehow the different parts of yourself becomes more systematic, it becomes more integrated, and eventually later on in life, hopefully by late adulthood, you really get to have this sense of who you really are. Now, in a research done by Gisela Lebevier, she concluded that considerable restructuring of the self can take place in emerging adulthood. She emphasizes that the key aspects of self-development in emerging adulthood involves an increase in self-reflection and a decision about a specific worldview. However, many still have difficulty integrating their complex view of the world. She says this difficulty occurs because emerging adults are still easily influenced by their emotions, which can distort their thinking and cause them to be self-serving and self-protective. In her research, it is not until 30 to 39 years of age that adults effectively develop a coherent, integrated world view. Meaning, you still have a long way to go in order for you to become a fully integrated individual. So, wag tayong magmadali. Wag tayong magmadali na maging adult, because you need to undergo this process of self-discovery before you realize who you really are. Another key concept that we need to understand is self-awareness. How much an emerging adult is aware of his or her psychological makeup, including her strengths and weaknesses. Many individuals do not have very good awareness of their psychological makeup and skills, as well as the causes of their weaknesses. So, for example, how aware is the person that he or she is a good or bad listener? This uses the best strategies to solve personal problems and is assertive rather than aggressive or passive in resolving conflicts. Awareness of strengths and weaknesses in these and many other aspects of life is an important dimension of self-understanding throughout the adult years, and emerging adulthood is a time where individuals can benefit considerably from addressing some of their weaknesses. So, the question is, how aware are you of your strengths and weaknesses? Pero hindi natatapos sa self-awareness. ang pagkakaroon ng mas malalim na pag-intindi sa sarili. It also involves understanding others. So, becoming a competent adolescent involves not only understanding oneself, but also understanding others. Among the aspects of understanding others that are important in adolescent development are perceiving others' traits and understanding multiple perspectives. So, hindi porket ito yung paniniwala mo, ito na yung tama. Sometimes you need to look at different perspectives. Ano ba yung opinion ng tao na to? Gaano ba kaimportante or gaano ba kalawak yung pagkakaintindi mo sa sitwasyon, at the same time, gaano ba kalawak yung pagkakaintindi ng ibang tao doon sa sitwasyon na yon. So, understanding others requires you to be inquisitive in their perspective from or a different perspective than yours. So this is what perspective taking is. It is the ability to assume another person's perspective and understand his or her thoughts and feelings. Developmental changes begin with the egocentric viewpoint in early childhood and end with in-depth perspective taking in adolescence. Pansinin ninyo, nung bata kayo, ang focus nyo lang ay yung sarili ninyo. Gusto ko tong laruan na to. Pag hindi binigay ng magulang, iiyak. Pag hindi nag-give in yung magulang dun sa pag-iyak, magwawala. Hanggang sa mapahiya na yung magulang until such time na, sige, bibilhin na lang yung gusto mo. While when we talk about perspective taking, as you grow old, nalalaman mo na hindi lahat ng gusto mo ay dapat masunod. Because you are able to get the perspective of your parents. Baka kaya hindi nila binibigay yung bagong cellphone na gusto mo. It's because kulang sa budget or dahil sa nawalan ng trabaho si daddy during the pandemic. So somehow, when you're able to get their perspective, you also get to understand where they are coming from. Another concept that we need to know is the social cognitive monitoring. So, as part of their increased awareness of themselves and others, adolescents monitor their social world more extensively than they did when they were children. So, example includes thinking of ways to get to know of other people, verifying if impressions made are consistent about the person. So, sometimes when you get to know a new individual, you want to verify, tama ba yung iniisip ko sa kanya? Masungit ba talaga siya or hindi? And then later on, you're going to verify these impressions kung consistent ba siya doon sa pagkakaintindi mo sa ugali niya or doon sa persona na meron siya. So, you try to talk to that person and then later on assess, ay, parang iba naman pala, parang mali yung first impression ko. So, another aspect of social cognitive monitoring is that you verify impressions made that are consistent about the person. Paraphrasing a person who has expressed their feelings to make sure that he or she has accurately understood them. You know how sometimes you're talking to your friends and then they're telling you their problems, pero somewhere along the way or doon sa kalagitnaan ng storya niya, nakita mo na wait lang, medyo magulo. So, you're going to verify them. You're going to ask them questions that would somehow make it clearer for you doon sa storya na kinikwento niya sa'yo. So, the adolescent's ability to monitor their social cognition may be an important aspect of their social maturity. So, hindi tayo parang mga bata na kung ito yung inisip, yan na yung paniniwalaan mo. Okay? As you grow old, as you become part of the emerging adult, you need to verify. You need to be able to monitor what you are thinking and verify it, what is the reality. So let us differentiate the difference between self-esteem and self-concept. When we say self-esteem, it is often referred to as self-worth or self-image. So basically, it is the global evaluative dimension of the self. When we talk about self-concept, it refers to the domain-specific evaluations of the self. Adolescents and emerging adults are make self-evaluations in many domains, whether it's academic, athletic, physical appearance, and so on. So basically, when we talk about self-esteem, this is your overall global evaluations. Do you feel good about yourself? Are you confident of yourself? But when we talk about self-concept, it is domain-specific evaluations. Are you good with this particular domain? To explain further, let's look into the different self-concept domains. So you have your handouts with you. Please look at it while I discuss all the self-concept domains. So when you say self-concept, it is domain specific. The first one is what we call the scholastic competence. So this is the perceived cognitive competence as applied to schoolwork. It refers to doing well at schoolwork, being able to figure out the answers, finishing one's schoolwork quickly, feeling that one is intelligent. So, sometimes these are students yung pwede nating sabihin na matatalino talaga. So, for example, when I was in high school, I'm not good scholastically. Literal na I'm failing subjects left and right. But I came from a school, you might have heard of this, it's Angelicum College. And it's a non-graded system of education. So basically, you just have to go through all the modules before you're being promoted to the next level. And I'm the type of person who procrastinates. Okay? Yung tipong, mas gugustuhin kong gawin ang ibang bagay bago mag-aral. So, when I was in high school, I am not competent, basically, in the academics or in scholastics. But when I transferred here in St. Paul, in college, unti-unti, I'm very thankful with St. Paul because nahasa niya yung kakayahan ko na mag-aral. And growing up, I always felt like ang bobo-bobo ko. Okay? Because I'm always at the bottom of the class, or kundi man bottom, basta nandun sa medyo below average ang intelligence. And when I transferred here, somehow, alam niyo yun, na-develop yung love ko for learning. And, take note, okay, when I when I reached third year college, I became a Dean's Lister. So, what I'm trying to say here is that some of you might feel very low in terms of their scholastic competence, but don't mind that. Maybe you are not in an environment that would make you competent about yourself. So hopefully, now that you are in senior high school, unti-unti ma-develop yun. Okay? Next one is what we call social competence. This refers to the characteristics of the self that define one's success or competence in that domain. Meaning, you are socially adept. Okay? Yung tipong if you are put in a position na makikipagkilala ka sa ibang tao, kaya mong dalhin ang sarili mo. That's what we mean by social competence. You being able to bring yourself forward, to go out of your comfort zone, to become social. That's what we mean by social competence. The third one is what we call the athletic competence. It refers to one's ability to do well at sports, including outdoor games, and demonstrating one's athletic prowess. Ayan. So, yung mga magagaling dyan sa sports, sa basketball, volleyball, or even sa 10-20 when you were younger, diba? Chinese garter. That's a athletic competence. So, if I will describe myself, again, I'm not athletically competent. Kung sa 10-20, di ba, may iba't ibang levels yan. Meron nilalagay lang dun sa ankle, sa tuhod, below the butt or the puwet, or dun sa may hips. Sa 10-20, hanggang number 2 lang ako. Hanggang tuhod lang. So, what happens is that lagi akong saling ket-ket. Okay? Walang gustong isali ako because matatalo sila. So, that's athletic competence. Next is physical appearance. So how you feel about you being good looking, or are you happy or satisfied with your looks, your body, face, or hair? Remember, one of the aspects of the self is social comparison. So, we tend to compare, ay, bakit mas maganda yung buhok niya kaysa sa akin? Bakit mas shiny yung hair niya kaysa sa akin? Bakit mas sexy siya? Bakit ako ganito katangkad pero sobrang payat? Okay? So, that is an example of the physical appearance self-concept domain. The fifth one is job competence. It's the extent to which the adolescent feels that he or she has job skills, is ready to do well at part-time jobs, and feels that he or she is doing well at the jobs that he or she has. So basically, if you feel competent with what you are working on with your job, somehow nakakadagdag siya doon sa self-esteem natin. The sixth one is romantic appeal. Ayan. It taps the teenager's perceptions that they are romantically attractive to those in whom they are interested, are dating the people they would like to be dating, and feel that they are fun and interesting on a date. So, not all people have romantic appeal. Sometimes, meron tayong tinatawag na late bloomers. Yung tipong during the high school or even in college, kumbaga parang walang nagkakagusto sa kanila. But the moment that nag-glow up, di ba? Yan ang mga common terms ngayon sa mga Gen Xers Or Gen Xers, no, Gen Zs pala. Glow up, di ba? Oras na nagkaroon ng glow up yung tao, somehow, more and more people find you attractive. Number 7 is what we call the behavioral conduct. The degree to which one takes the time, or one likes the way one behaves, does the right thing, acts the way one is supposed to act, and avoids getting into trouble. So with behavioral conduct, usually, if you do what is expected of you, if you are being responsible, you feel competent in terms of the behavioral conduct. But of course, there are some students na medyo hirap sumunod sa batas. Alam niyo yon? Sinabihan ng magpalit ng profile picture, hanggang ngayon wala pa ring profile picture na ina-upload, or hanggang ngayon si Harry Roque pa rin ang profile picture niya. That's an example of how competent you are in terms of behavioral conduct. Number 8, close friendship. It's the ability to make close friends, those with whom one can share personal thoughts and secrets. You are at the stage of your life wherein you need to develop close friendships. Sabi nga nila, friends that stay with you forever are usually your friends in high school. Why? Because sila yung nakakakilala sa'yo nung panahon na nagsisimula ka palang kilalanin yung sarili mo, until such time na unti-unti nabubuo mo yung sarili mo. Nag-college ka, they are still with you. Okay, you try to keep in touch until you get married, hanggang sa magkaroon kayo ng anak, naging parte na ng buhay ninyo ang mga kaibigan ninyo ng high school, naging ninong at ninang pa sila. Diba? So, close friendship is an important domain. And hindi natin pwedeng sabihin na, ay, hindi ko kailangan ng ibang tao. Kung hindi na lang ako kayang tanggapin, okay lang sa akin. That's not how friendship works. There should be some sort of give and take in such relationship. And the last one is what we call the global self-worth. So this is your evaluation of how much one likes oneself as a person, how you feel that you are happy with the way you are leading your life, or just basically be happy with the way one is as a human being. So, again, ano ang pagkakaiba ng self-esteem sa self-concept? Self-esteem is your overall evaluation of yourself. Are you confident? Are you happy? Are you satisfied with your life? These are the questions that will be answered with identifying or measuring your self-esteem. But when we talk about self-concept, it is domain specific. Meaning, um, out of all these nine self-concept domains, maaaring 5 or 6 dyan, competent ka. But in most cases, according to research, in order for you to get or to have high self-esteem, dapat somehow you get as many or you develop as many self-concept domains as possible. Okay? I hope you understand what I'm trying to say here. So how do we know if a person has high or low self-esteem? Usually there are behavioral indicators. So when we talk about these positive indicators, usually ibig sabihin nito mataas ang self-esteem ng tao. Okay? Mataas ang self-esteem niya, masaya siya, confident siya, satisfied siya sa buhay niya. So, how do we identify that? It's usually because of these behavioral indicators. So, the positive indicators is first, gives others directives or commands. Okay? So, hindi sila nahihiya na magbigay ng direction or magbigay ng command sa ibang tao. Second, they use voice quality appropriate for the situation. So, hindi sila nagtataas ng boses just to get the message across. Being able to give clear, concise directions is already an indicator na confident yung tao. Also, people who have high self-esteem is able to express their opinions. So, hindi lang sila basta-basta tatahimik. Okay? If they know that something is wrong or something is could be better, they are able to express their opinions. They also sit with others during social activities, meaning hindi sila nahihiya na makihalubilo sa ibang tao. Okay? They also work cooperatively in a group. So, it's not just about them giving direction, but it's more of them asking for suggestions from the group and then cooperate with them to work harmoniously. Next is that they face each other or face other people when speaking or being spoken to. So, hindi sila nahihiya na to the point na hindi sila titingin sa mata ng ibang tao. Pag sila ay kinakausap, titingnan nila sa mata or haharap sila doon sa tao na yon. Which leads us to number 7. They are able to maintain eye contact during conversation. So, hindi awkward on their end to maintain that eye contact, eye-to-eye contact. Okay? Also, they get to initiate friendly contact with others. People who have high self-esteem, they know how to handle other people. And when I say handle, not manipulate but it's more of they are able to have a friendship or develop friendship with other people. Also, they are able to maintain comfortable space between self and others. So, they when they talk to people, hindi sobrang layo, hindi rin sobrang lapit na medyo feeling close na. So, they're able to just have that comfortable space between themselves. And lastly, is that they have little hesitation in speech and they're able to speak fluently. So let's now look into the negative indicators of self-esteem. First one is that they put other people down by teasing, name-calling, or gossiping. You know how sometimes dahil sa sobrang baba ng self-esteem ng tao, para maiangat niya yung sarili niya, what he would do is that they're going to pull other people down. In Filipino, we call this the talangka or the crab mentality, 'di ba? Wherein sasabihan nila ng hindi maganda yung ibang tao with an implication na, ay, hindi ako yun. So, for example, nako, ano yan, hindi nagbabayad ng utang yan si Miss Condes. Ganyan. Pero, anong implication nun? What you are actually trying to say is that ikaw, hindi ka ganun. Ikaw, nagbabayad ka ng utang. Okay? The second one is that they use gestures that are dramatic or out of context. So, medyo overacting kumbaga. 'Di ba? Um, darating yung kaibigan mo, maghe-hello, sa halip na simple wave lang, talaga namang maikumpas yung kanyang kamay para lang makita siya or mapansin mo siya. Third is that they engage in inappropriate touching or avoid physical contact. So, it could go both ways. So, they tend to be overly touching, masyadong clingy, okay? Or sometimes, they avoid physical contact, even a simple shake of hands or a pat on the back kapag meron kang gustong praise na ipakita, na sabihin sa kanya. Medyo umiilag sila. That's what we mean by avoids physical contact. They also tend to give excuses for failures. Ayan. Hindi nila inaako yung responsibility doon sa maling ginawa nila. So, for example, bumagsak ka doon sa test sa personal development. Tinanong ka ng magulang mo, bakit ka bumagsak? Ang isasagot ng tao, kasi hindi marunong magturo yung teacher ko. Okay? A person who has low self-esteem tends to put the blame on other people. Number 5, they brag excessively about their achievements, skills, and appearance. So, hindi na nila hinihintay na ibang tao ang magsabi ng mga praises na ito. Kumbaga sila mismo, sinasabi na nila, ay magaling ako, matalino ako, kailangan sumunod kayo sa akin. Maganda ako, kailangan panoorin nyo yung YouTube or vlogs ko. Ganyan. Number 6, they also tend to verbally put their self down or self-deprecation. Meaning, hindi na nila hinihintay ang ibang tao na magsabi ng mga negative traits nila. Sila na mismo ang magsasabi sa ibang tao, ay, tamad kasi ako eh. Hindi ko kayang gawin yan kasi hindi ko kaya. And lastly, they speak too loudly, abruptly, or in a dogmatic tone. Sometimes, people who have low self-esteem could also be such a bully. Okay? Masyadong malakas ang boses to the point na mapapahiya na yung kausap niya. They have this dogmatic tone that either you go my way or no way at all. So, kailangan yung sarili niya yung laging masusunod. Okay? So, I hope you guys get to differentiate the difference between a person who have low and high self-esteem. We could always go back to the behavioral indicators. So, the thing is, an adolescent's or emerging adult's self-esteem might indicate a perception about whether he or she is intelligent and attractive. For example, that perception may not be accurate. Thus, a high self-esteem may refer to accurate, justified perceptions of one's worth as a person and one's successes and accomplishments, but it can also indicate an arrogant, grandiose, unwanted sense of superiority over others. In the same manner, low self-esteem may suggest either an accurate perception of one's shortcomings or a distorted, even pathological sense of insecurity and inferiority. So sabi nga natin, 'di ba, pag sinabing self-esteem, ito daw yung overall perception natin sa sarili natin. But the thing is, it can be accurate or not. So, if you're able to see yourself accurately, okay, you're able to judge your worth based on your successes and your accomplishments, that's good. But sometimes, may tendency rin kasi tayo na masyadong mataas yung tingin sa sarili. That sometimes we get to come off as arrogant or sobrang yabang naman. The same way na, for example, with a low self-esteem, sometimes a person having a low self-esteem could be accurate yung kanyang representation if alam niya yung mga shortcomings niya. But sometimes, it becomes inaccurate kapag sobra-sobra naman yung pagdududa niya sa sarili niya to the point that he or she feels insecure and inferior against other people. Now, What are the social contexts and self-esteem? So the thing is, family, peers, and schools actually contribute to the development of an adolescent's self-esteem. So one of the researches that came about is of Baldwin and Hoffman in 2002, and they found out that cohesive family, or the as family cohesiveness increased, or habang tumataas daw yung or lumalaki yung pagiging close ng pamilya, the adolescent self-esteem also increases over time. So family cohesion was based on the amount of time the family spent together, the quality of their communication, and the extent to which the adolescent was involved in family decision making. So, kung gusto mo daw ng mataas, or if you want your children or your teenagers or adolescents to have high self-esteem, you need to develop that family cohesiveness. The closer you are to your family, okay, the more time you spend with your family, and the quality of communication that you have within the family, if you are very close with each other, eventually your children or the adolescent's self-esteem will increase. Now, in another investigation by Cooper Smith in 1967, they found out that um, parenting attributes are often associated with boys' high self-esteem. Expression of affection, concern of the boy's problems, harmony in the home, participation in joint family activities, availability to give competent, organized help when the boys needed it, setting clear and fair rules, abiding by the rules, and allowing the boys freedom within well-prescribed limits. So, para daw tumaas ang self-esteem ng mga lalaki, ng mga kabataang lalaki, importante na merong magandang parenting style ang magulang. So the more na tahimik ang bahay, there's a harmonious relationship within the family. There's the parents are able to give competent advices. They are able to help their children set clear and fair rules and abide by the rules. Somehow it increases the boys' self-esteem. Villante, Boulay, and June in 2011 found that peer judgments gain increasing importance in adolescents. So kung gusto mo rin daw ng mataas na self-esteem, kailangan ma-develop yung close friendship during adolescent years, as well as having good relationship with your peers. And of course, Harter, he also found out that the link between peer approval and self-worth increases during adolescence. If more and more people like you, your self-worth also increases during adolescence. Okay, onti na lang. Please stay with me. Okay, so what are the consequences of low self-esteem? So for most adolescents and emerging adults, the emotional discomfort of low self-esteem is only temporary. Okay? So sa edad ninyo, temporary lang yung low self-esteem, because the more time that you spend on studying, the more competent you become scholastically, the more time that you spend with studying, like for example, umabot kayo sa college, nakapagtapos kayo sa college, mas marami kayong nakilalang tao, mas maraming opportunity for you to develop yourself. So the more that your self-concept domains increases. Okay? But of course, hindi rin naman, sabi nga natin, temporary lang. But not everyone gets to surpass that low self-esteem. Okay? You need to remember that having low self-esteem, it can also develop into other problems. How? It is actually implicated in overweight and being obese, anxiety, depression, suicide, and delinquency. Why? Miss, bakit? It's because of the lack of self-domains or self-concept domains. Okay? Paano ba nade-depress yung tao? Because They have little opportunity to interact with other people. Bakit little yung opportunity? Because wala silang pagkakataon na makipaghalubilo sa ibang tao. So for example, after senior high school, you stop studying. Okay? Because sabi nyo nga, sabi nung tao, ay may depression ako, wala akong motivation na mag-aral. The thing is, that's not how you are going to cure your depression. Okay? You need to have medication and therapy. And then, you need to engage yourself in yung mga makabuluhan na gawain. So, same as suicide and delinquency. Now, they also found out that the youth who with low self-esteem, they actually have lower life satisfaction at the age of 30 years old. So, meaning, kapag mababa ang self-esteem ng tao at this point in their life at hindi nila napataas ang self-esteem na yon, pagdating nyo ng 30 years old, mas mababa ang life satisfaction nyo. You will not be happy. You will always go back to the regrets. Ayan. You'll be collecting regrets. Of course, low and decreasing self-esteem in adolescence was also linked to adult depression 2 decades later. Okay? So, meaning, kung hindi nyo nalampasan ang low self-esteem, there is a high probability that when you turn to age 40, 2 decades So, kung 20 kayo, 30, 40. When you reach the age of 40 years old, there is a probability that you will develop adult depression. And the last one is that when low self-esteem is compounded by different school transitions, a troubled family life, or other stressful events, an individual's problems can intensify. Okay? That's why I am urging all of you that when we do our synchronous classes, you need to be confident. You need to go out of your comfort zone and talk. Diba? When I call your name, speak up. Or even if I'm not calling your name, but if I pose a question, please have that courage to give your answers. Another term that is important to note is the self-regulation. It involves the ability to control one's behavior without having to rely on other people's help. So, what does it mean? It means that you need to be able to work on things on your own. Diba? Pag may sinabing assignment, at this point in your life, you shouldn't be asking for your parents' help. Okay? So that's self-regulation. Another example will be, kunwari, nagkasayahan kayo, nag-inuman, okay? Okay lang naman, okay. I'm not saying na okay lang naman uminom, pero just in case you find yourself in the position na mag-iinuman kayo, kailangan kaya mong tumayo dun sa kinauupuan mo at makakauwi ka ng bahay without the help of other people. That is self-regulation. Okay? Now, we also have what we call the effortful control. This involves inhibiting impulses and not engaging in destructive behavior, focusing and maintaining attention despite distractions, and initiating and completing tasks that have long-term value, even if they may seem unpleasant. So when we talk about effortful control, it's you being able to complete your task. Kahit gaano pa kahirap yan, kahit gaano pa kahaba yung proseso na kailangan mong pagdaanan, you need to be able to do that. Also, it also involves being able to focus and maintain attention kahit may mga distractions. So, for example, kahit hinahata ka na ng Mobile Legends, maglaro ka na, but since you need to finish on listening to this lecture, you need to work on this. That is effortful control. Yung kaya mong baliwalain yung isang bagay na magpapasaya or magpapadistress sa'yo. It requires effortful control. Yung hindi ka magi-give in sa galit mo. Diba? Sometimes there are people na because they are so angry, lahat ng bagay na mahawakan nila, sisirain nila. It, it, it requires a lot of effort for you to be able to control your anger. Okay? I hope I'm clear with self-regulation and effortful control. Okay. This is the last slide. I hope that you're still there. So, um, how are we going to improve the emerging adult self-esteem? First is that you need to identify the causes of low self-esteem and the domains of competence important to the self. So adolescents and emerging adults have the highest self-esteem when they perform competently in domains important to the self. Therefore, adolescents and emerging adults should be encouraged to identify and value their domains of competence. So if we go back to the 9 domains of competence, scholastic domains, athletic competence, social competence, you need to be able to get or develop as many domains as possible. Okay. Second, provide emotional support and social approval. Some youth with low self-esteem come from conflicted families or conditions in which they experience abuse or neglect, situations in which support is unavailable. So both parental and peer support were related to the adolescent's general self-worth. So what I'm trying to say here, if I may go back to my favorite line or favorite quote, if you could be anything in this world, be kind. Okay? So you need to be able to give that emotional support and approval to your friends. Kasi baka sa inyo lang sila makakakuha ng approval at saka ng pagmamahal na kailangan nila. Because sometimes there are individuals who when they are at home, alam mo yun, sobrang stress yung buhay nila. Nandyan yung mayat maya sisigaw yung magulang. Especially if they have nagging parents or nagging mothers. Okay? Yung tipong kailangan alas 6 na umaga gising na. Kung hindi, magtatatalak na yung nanay. Okay? Or simpleng bagay pinalalaki yung problema. So, it's important that we give that emotional and social support. The third one is, of course, foster achievement. Emerging adults develop higher self-esteem when they know what tasks are important for achieving goals and that they have experienced success in performing them or similar behaviors. What I'm trying to say here is that celebrate your small victories. Kung hindi ka magaling scholastically, pero doon sa quiz mo here in personal development, naka 7/10 ka. 'Di ba? That's 70%. So, you need to bask in that glory. Uy, kahit papano, lumampas sa kalahati yung score ko. Maybe, later on, you will find yourself getting a higher score, like perhaps 8/10, 9/10, or even 10/10. So, always foster that achievement. We have this word called self-efficacy. It refers to the individual's beliefs that they can master a situation and produce positive outcomes. So, in order to foster achievement, kailangan meron ka munang believe sa sarili mo. That is self-efficacy. Kailangan ikaw mismo, sinasabi mo sa sarili mo na kaya kong lampasan ang problema na to. Kaya kong ma-achieve itong goals na to. Kahit gaano pa kahirap yan, as long as you're able to tell yourself that is self-efficacy. Somehow you are one step closer to your goal. And the last one is help adolescents to cope with challenges. Meaning, self-esteem often increases when adolescents face a problem, try to cope with it, and rather than avoid it. So, kailangan, pag ikaw ay nagkaroon ng problema, hanapan mo ng paraan. Hanapan mo ng solusyon. Because once you're able to overcome it, you will become more ready. Okay? Mas magiging handa ka doon sa susunod na problema. Facing problems realistically, honestly, and non-defensively produces favorable self-evaluative thoughts, which lead to the self-generated approval that raises self-esteem. Okay? So, if you encounter problems, ngayon pa lang sa edad ninyo, 15, 16 years old, pag kayo ay nagkaroon ng problema, welcome it. Okay? Wag niyong isipin na, hindi ko kaya tong problema na to. Again, sabi ko nga kanina, once you're able to overcome a problem now, you will become more ready to face the challenges or the succeeding or the next challenges. And then once you're able to overcome the next challenge, you will become ready to overcome the succeeding challenges. So, kesa naman yung wala dahil sa iniwasan mo ang problema simula 15 hanggang 25 years old. Pag dumating yung panahon na eto na, yung malaking problema ay dumating na sa'yo, hindi mo na malaman kung paano mo siya haharapin. Kasi, when you were younger, iniwasan mo ang mga problema na to instead of facing it. Alright, so, I hope you guys get to somehow understand what I am trying to say here. I know this is not an ideal way of giving lectures. Kahit ako, mas gusto ko pa rin yung face-to-face. You will be able to see my facial reaction and mas mapapahaba ko, kumbaga, yung examples na pwede kong ibigay. So, I just hope that this video would help you understand the handouts that you have there. Okay, so again, for the succeeding 6 more modules, I will come up with the same type of video. Alright, so thank you guys for listening. I hope that you still try to go through the process of listening on my succeeding lectures. Thank you guys. Bye-bye.